Hi and welcome. A special welcome to Steve. Steve, do you want to just tell us a bit about who you are and what you do?
Hi, yeah, I'm Stephen Driver. I'm the Children and Youth Minister for Poole Christian Fellowship. I've been doing this for over 7 years here now, which in youth worker terms makes me super old. I think the average lifespan of a youth worker is like 18 months, so anything longer than that you're considered old. So yeah, that's what I do. Mainly for me, that is teaching and ministering the Word of God to our young people here at PCF and helping them to do the same to people around them.
Interestingly, one of the things I was saying to you before we put the before we press record was a lot of youth projects are very much about putting on and doing missional events for young people. You've got a very different approach. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you do and how you came to that place?
Yeah, so I've been exploring lots of different forms of ministry, of youth ministry, since I started. And I think being in Poole, you're actually in a kind of hub for it because you've got colleges like Moorlands College on your doorstep. And but equally, there's quite a conservative contingent of churches as well in Poole. And so you kind of learn off all of them. And you're just kind of going, what is God really doing here? And I love it when they both say the same thing, makes my life much easier. But for some of the time, they don't say the same thing. But I came to this conclusion a few years ago that actually a lot of people who do my job, we go out and we do these projects and we basically burn ourselves out because we become the person that young people are going to come to know Jesus through, because we're the only me and like 2 or 3 other people in my church, the only people going out to engage. Whereas God has blessed our church with young people who need to be equipped and release themselves. And if I can show them Jesus, if I can give them a sense of who Jesus is, that they're captivated by that love, they're overflowing with joy to the point where they are naturally sharing Jesus with their friends. And I just feel like that is not just a model that is good for my personal health as I go out and do this. I think it's also incredibly healthy for equipping young people and setting the precedent of what being a Christian and living a Christian should be. Because like one of the things I hear often is that I'm part of the generation that are biblically illiterate, which means that when people get to adulthood, because the youth ministry hasn't equipped them to do this. So we're expecting adults to suddenly go out and tell people about Jesus, but they just haven't been given the tools through their childhood. And that's such a challenge to me as a youth and children's minister, that needs to be what I do, is to equip so they can be released to do a ministry. Now, I have nothing against these projects. I've done them, and I think that they work in tandem. I think if I don't go out and do it myself as well, I'm not giving a good example to the young people I'm serving as well. So I think there's room for it, but if it becomes like I'm the person reaching the 95% in the church when I've actually got like 10, 15 young people who are wanting to know about Jesus right in front of me, I should be concentrating on that. That should be where I spend most of my time, because they represent all the schools around here. And can engage with people, but engage people their age better than I can. I'm 30 years old, they're actually their age. And I just think that's when you look at mission work, isn't like if you go overseas mission, they say, go and equip people there so they can then speak to the people in their community. Like your job isn't like that. That's been overseas mission practice for 100 years now. Like I think that's but we don't do that with young people as much.
One thing that really worries me is I worked for, probably best not say which one it was, but I worked for a large church up in the north of England, and we got lots of students. And one of the things, and some were brilliant, some really served, some were fantastic. But one of the stories I used to say quite often was that lots of people came from Christian backgrounds, and basically and had a very sort of consumerist sort of mentality. And the church puts on all sorts of stuff for me. And then actually, when they have to live the life themselves without all their props around them, actually, it's much harder to live for Jesus if you've not had the tools. And so almost it's that sort of the dropout between people leaving their home church and their home family church and the thriving relationship with God at the end of university is quite a worrying statistic. So,
there's two big drop-off points in youth ministry that's well known, which is 14 when they transition to kind of the older youth group, or 18 when they go to university, when they don't have the family unit that's around them. And so that is a worrying statistic. And there's also the consumeristic thing is also a huge battle as well for youth ministry, I found, because there are great organizations that have put on events and things, and you both, me and you, have actually been part of running one.
The same one at different reasons, yeah.
But what that does is, I think that has led to people going to, I need to find a church that meets that kind of spectacle level. And actually that is about a consumeristic thing, and not actually going, what can you put into this, and actually asking the wrong question before you even join the church. Like, the right question for joining a church, for me anyway, is theologically, am I aligned here? Like, is this something where actually I can work with this church and serve in this church? And there might be secondary issues that I disagree with, but I can still work within that. Like that's fine. Whereas the question I'm hearing more often is their worship band good? Or
they're funny. Yeah.
It's how long is the talk? Like, that kind of thing.
And short is normally the right answer. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I totally agree with that. And so my model of disciple is really a disciple making disciples model. And my role is to equip young people, and I've seen that last night at a youth group, and there's this girl who's so in love with Jesus, and we did a big question series, and we just spent, like, we were supposed to only go for an hour. We went on for way more than that, going through all these issues, because she has friends at school that are asking her these questions, and it's like, well, yes, that's brilliant, because I know that in that school, that actually I know there's no schools work going into it at the moment. It's not or hasn't been traditionally had one. I know that she's in there and she's representing Christ to people, and that warms my heart. That excites me. There's a young person doing that on the front line, without actually needing an adult to be there doing it for her.
Definitely. And it's what you said earlier about overseas mission. It's almost you're equipping indigenous evangelists who speak the language of their peers to be in their schools as authentic Christians, which as they grow up again is what they need to be wherever they go and whatever they do, because actually that's what we're all called to be. We're all called to be authentic Christians trying to live our life indigenously.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things with youth workers, the youth workers are quite short term, because I think what happens is that they're trying to keep young, or they're trying to keep in, like, have an awareness with what's going on with lots of other people, like what the young people are into, and actually that saps a lot of your time and effort when you could be just being you and engaging with the kids you do have. I don't have to feel like I have to be cool or even know how TikTok works. I can understand TikTok.
For years. I don't think I've ever been cool.
I don't have to feel like, I think I know youth workers that have been doing it for 40 years, and to be honest, for half the stuff they have no idea about, because they've got this model. I learned off them. They're saying, you know what, it's about equipping the young people they can speak the language, they know what's going on. Don't sweat about these things you don't know about. So that's always helpful to know.
And actually, the key part, I think, with a lot of that discipleship stuff isn't about impressing young people, which a lot of what we try and do is actually about loving them, and they know you've got their back, and they know that you're praying for them, and you know that if they tell you they're having a hard time at school, they know you're praying, and you're going to ask them how they're doing next time you see them, and that matters to young people, I think, much more than whether it's Katy Perry or Taylor Swift that sung whatever.
Because otherwise you just look like you're trying to be cool anyway, and that never works. Like I told the kids that after the youth group I go for a walk, and when I walk I pray, and literally after this meeting, I'm going for this walk. What would you like prayer for? And suddenly they're like, oh, Stephen's actually going to be doing this.
Yeah.
So they were. You can see that's where their heart is. You can see that when you invest in that way with that heart, they really get a sense of who Jesus is in practice and in reality. And I think the other sense of it, one of the other things as well, is that I've come down the line of, you know what, I get less bothered about how big the youth group is as well, because I'm like, actually, the smaller it is, the more I can disciple those that group of that number. And even if I don't see fruit during their time in the youth group, like if they're eager but there's no fruit here, not engaging, actually that's a long-term plan, is, you know, when they're 20s, their 30s, their 40s, they're doing stuff way beyond I could imagine. And that's my prayer, is to pray for the unlikely, pray that will be something that just goes in.
The church I grew up in Eastbourne, there's only a few of us in there, but I was the first batch of teenagers going through, because it hadn't had much teenagers before that. And I obviously was a vicar for a while. My other friend Mark, he's leading a church in outer London. My friend Evers is now youth minister at a church. Emma stayed put, and she's been active in the church and all sorts of. And so, like, there's only a tiny group of us, but actually, years on, all of us are still following Jesus, and all of us are still serving in some capacity in something. And you think, well, actually, that's actually what success looks like, rather than the fact that you might have had a youth group of 35, but actually, if none of them are still loving and following and serving Jesus, then actually that's not real success. It looks good at the time, but actually, the long-term fruit is real people knowing Jesus, following Jesus, longer term. One of the other things I was quite interested in is doing schools work. Is that in some schools we go in and we run like lunchtime clubs and things, but in some of the schools we had the young people themselves ran the Christian Union.
Yeah.
Actually, it's interesting to see that when it's run by them, how much more fruitful and better it is.
Yeah.
They're doing themselves, and they're learning how to read the Bible and teach scripture. They're praying for each other. It's got that sense of ownership, and again, it's that equipping and empowering thing that I think is so key. And I'm always wondering whether we've almost got this around the wrong way, really, is whether actually sometimes this kind of youth work done well is actually what adult church should be like, and maybe we fall into the trap of sometimes thinking that our church needs to be the one thing that puts on the entertainment that brings everybody in, and it's all down to the vicar to reach an entire parish or minister to reach an entire area, really. So there's a question there somewhere, but I think I just talked.
You did, but I would agree. Like I always think about my own, you know, I can only use my own experience in some respects. And I just remember that I was in a really good youth group. They taught me things. There were foundations, but I gotta be honest, I was double lifing it at some points, because like there was no real like reality to it. It was like a good teaching. But everything changed when I went to CU at university, because suddenly they were like, Steve, we want you to be doing tea and toast and reaching out to students at Friday at 2:00 in the morning. Are you up for that? And I was like, oh, I've never been asked to do anything like this. That sounds like fun. That sounds interesting. That's for me. And then I got into that, and then suddenly I then moved into running. They asked me to run a small group after a while, and the CU was growing, and I was reaching people I'd never done that really before, apart from like under the guise of an adult telling me how to do it. This was an opportunity for me to actually try my hand at it, and I think, you know, I'm a bit grieving the loss that I didn't have that push when I was, you know, 15, and I had to wait until I was 19 for that to happen. You know, where I couldn't, and so that's kind of also where my heart is that I look at myself and go, you know, I want the kids to have that experience now. They don't need to wait. There's no kind of, you know, for adults, we don't do that. They come to know Jesus, we equip them, we get them overflowing with joy of Jesus, and we continue to input into them with the idea that they will reach out to other people naturally. That's my thing. it all came from as well. I've had so much input over my life, and I'm so thankful for it. There's a Above Bar Church in Southampton. I don't know if you're aware of them. They do this formation school, and I did training with them for a year. And they always have this illustration about like how disciples are made. And it's like, if you have this cup and you fill it with water, a lot of church and a lot of people's thinking is that you need to, we kind of stab holes in ourselves, and that the water of the joy of the Lord kind of comes out of those holes, and people do come to know Jesus, but actually it's at the detriment of you, and you kind of go lower and lower and lower. And actually, when I keep on using the phrase overflowing, is that actually we need to get to a point where we are just naturally coming out of that. And I think if we equip young people well, they can do exactly the same. It's there's no difference there. So yeah.
Brilliant. And so I guess is there anything you'd like to say? Actually, can I just ask you one last question? If you were going to have a chat with a young version of yourself, and what would you say to you age 19 as you
19 before I go to uni,
yeah.
or earlier than that.
Yeah, well, whatever. You can pick a time.
I would probably say to the young Steve is like, hey, what you doing? Like, don't live like. I would say, I would want to say to them is, for you to do this, Steve, you need to radically go for it. You can't be half-hearted. You're either going to be one or the other. You need to go for it. Here, there are so many more tools out there, and here are some tools to get you started. And I promise you, if you get yourself radically involved in church, radically involved in the God's word, that God will use you more than you even realize he is. And I think that was what I would say. That's pretty much what I came to when I went to see you, is that suddenly I was pushed to do radical things, and I was pushed to do things I was uncomfortable with. And I had to, but if I got there earlier and said, look, you can do that now, you're going to look weird, you're going to look different, don't worry, but actually that's fine, that's cool. And that's what I say to the young people.
You don't have to wait to follow Jesus to be grown up. You can you can have a real relationship and serve now. Yeah,
it's not, you don't have to wait till you're 19 or 20 to be counted as someone who can tell people about Jesus. That's the thing.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Steve. That's been excellent. And I love the illustration with the glass as well. I'm going to probably nick that.
Yeah, don't worry. I've nicked it from, he's actually a guy called Marcus Honeysett. It's his little illustration. So I've stolen it from him. He probably stolen it from someone else. So this is...
He'll probably watch the video going, actually, it's not mine. I nicked it from someone else.
Yeah, if he ever comes across this.
Copyright.
Yeah.
Okay, bless you, Steve. Thank you.